You, a lawyer, he scoffed, slamming his beer on the table. Girls like you end up waitressing or knocked up. I was 17. No savings, no support. And sitting across from me was the man who had raised me not with love, but with fists and fear. My stepfather had always made it clear I was nothing, and when I told him I'd apply to law school, he laughed, loud, cruel, and in my face. 10 years later, I stood in court, wearing the robe holding the evidence, staring him down across the room. This time I had the power, and he had no idea what was coming. Have you ever wished you could confront the person who broke you? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs justice. My name is Vanessa. I'm 28 now, but the battle for my life started long before I was old enough to vote. Growing up, I didn't know what a normal home felt like. My stepfather Richard was a man who controlled everything what I wore, who I saw when I spoke, even what I believed I was worth. My mother shrank into silence, a ghost of herself, while I carried the weight of his cruelty on my back. He never laid a hand on me in front of anyone, of course. That was his skill abuse in the shadows. When I turned 18 and told him I wanted to go to college, law school specifically, he kicked me out the very same night. No suitcase. No goodbye. Just a slammed door and the echo of his words, "Don't come crawling back." But I didn't crawl. I fought. I worked 3 jobs, slept in my car, and every exam I passed, every textbook I bought with tips from a diner shift, was one step closer to the day I would stand above him, not beneath him. And when that day came, oh, it was so much more than revenge. I still remember the look in his eyes that night, cold, unflinching, full of hate. It wasn't the first time Richard had tried to crush me, but it was the first time I realized he actually enjoyed doing it. I was only 6 when he married my mother. I don't remember the wedding, but I remember how quickly things changed. My mother used to smile. She used to hum while folding laundry and dance in the kitchen when her favorite Motown songs came on. After he moved in, the music stopped. Her smile disappeared. And I stopped being a child. At first, it was little things. He hated when I asked questions. "Stop talking so much. It's annoying." Then it was how I laughed, how I walked, how I chewed my food. Every little thing became a problem. And when I started getting A's in school, instead of being proud, he'd sneer, "You think you're better than us now." I learned early that I couldn't win with him. And yet I tried. I joined the debate team secretly, hid my report cards under my mattress. Teachers praised me, but I couldn't bring those words home. Praise made him angry. My mom noticed, but she never stopped him. She'd just say, "Don't provoke him, Vanessa. Just stay quiet." But I couldn't stay quiet forever. At 16, I told him I wanted to be a lawyer. Not a dreamer, not a waitress, not some man's punching bag. I wanted to fight for people like my mom. That night, he called me a useless little girl with big delusions. He slammed a chair so hard, it cracked, then left the house for hours. My mom cried, but said nothing to defend me. A year later, I had saved up enough to apply to community college. I had it all planned: scholarships, transfer programs, even student housing. But when Richard found out, he exploded. "You're not taking a dime from this house. If you want to go so bad, leave." So, I did. It was a warm June night. He tossed a trash bag of my clothes onto the driveway and locked the door. I had $67 in my pocket, and nowhere to sleep. I stayed in a friend's basement for a week before her parents found out. After that, it was shelters. Then my car. I worked at a gas station during the day and waited tables at night. I'd come home after midnight, open my second-hand textbooks, and study until my eyes blurred. I got through my first year of college that way, barely sleeping, barely surviving, but alive. What kept me going? The thought of my stepfather sitting smugly in that living room recliner thinking he'd beaten me. I used that rage like fuel. I imagined him watching me one day on TV, hearing my name in court, knowing he failed to break me. By the time I was 22, I had transferred into a state university with a full scholarship. I still remember walking into my first constitutional law class, heart pounding, hands shaking. I didn't feel like I belonged, not yet, but I knew I had earned it. Law school was another level of hell. Everyone seemed to come from polished backgrounds, lawyers' kids' prep schools, summer internships. And then there was me, still working night shifts, still hiding the bruises of my past. More than once, I cried in the library bathroom, wondering if Richard had been right. Maybe I wasn't smart enough. Maybe girls like me didn't belong here. But every time I doubted myself, I'd think of my mother, how she used to sit by the window when I was a child, staring out at nothing. I didn't just want a degree. I wanted power, the power to fight for people like her, the power to never be helpless again. During my third year, I interned at the district attorney's office. It was the first time I saw justice from the inside, and I was hooked. Prosecuting cases gave me a fire I'd never known. I wasn't just studying the law anymore. I was wielding it. And then came him. One day, a case file landed on my supervisor's desk. Insurance fraud, domestic abuse allegations. A man named Richard T. Walters. My hands went cold. It couldn't be. Not that Richard, but it was. My stepfather, now married to another woman, charged with stealing thousands in fake disability claims. His new wife, bruised and terrified, had finally called the police. I stared at that file for hours. My past written in ink and paper. His crimes, his lies, his pattern. And suddenly I saw everything clearly. This wasn't just a chance for closure. This was my moment. I asked my supervisor for the case. She hesitated at first, but when I told her the truth, all of it, she nodded. "Let's do this right," she said. From that moment, I poured everything into the case. Every memory, every tear, every sleepless night. It all became part of the mission. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. For me. For my mom. For every woman who had ever been told to stay quiet. And Richard. He had no idea who was coming for him. They say the courtroom is where truth comes to light. But for me, it was where ghosts came back to life. The day of the preliminary hearing, I walked into the courtroom in a crisp navy suit, my prosecutor's badge pinned tightly to my lapel. I had barely slept the night before. My stomach twisted with every step, but I kept my head high. I'd earned this. I wasn't just a lawyer. I was his prosecutor. Richard was already seated at the defendant's table when I walked in. At first, he didn't look up. He was too busy joking with his lawyer, cocky and smug, just like I remembered. But then the clerk called my name, Prosecutor Vanessa Moore, representing the state. And he froze. His eyes locked on mine, and in that instant I saw the flicker of recognition, the disbelief, the confusion. Then came the fear. He opened his mouth slightly, almost as if to speak, but nothing came out. I didn't blink. I opened with my pretrial statement. Clear. Calm. Direct. The defendant is accused of deliberately defrauding multiple insurance companies over a span of 6 years. But what's more disturbing, Your Honor, is the consistent pattern of domestic violence accompanying those crimes. I could see him squirm. During the break, his attorney approached me, trying to pull some slimy trick. Look, Vanessa, maybe we could settle this. No need to drag personal history into the courtroom. Personal history. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. This case wasn't built on emotion. It was built on evidence photos of bruises, falsified medical records, forged insurance documents. His new wife Elaine had been terrified when she came forward, but she was brave enough to testify, and I would make sure her voice was heard. But just when I thought I had seen it all, the first major twist hit me. My mother. Out of nowhere, I got a call from the victim advocate assigned to the case. Vanessa. She said carefully, "There's someone asking to speak with you. She says she's your mother." I hadn't spoken to my mom in over 9 years. I hesitated. My breath caught. But I agreed to meet her. We sat across from each other in a tiny consultation room outside the courtroom. She looked older, tired, thinner, but her eyes were the same. Sad, soft, uncertain. "I didn't know what he did to you," she whispered. I knew. But I didn't let myself know. I wanted to scream, to ask why she didn't protect me, why she stayed silent all those years, why she let him throw me out like garbage. But I didn't scream. I just said, "You don't get to explain now. This isn't about you anymore." She nodded slowly. "I understand. But I wanted you to know. I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry. I didn't cry, not then. I saved it for later alone in my car. But somewhere deep inside, a part of me that had been clenched for years started to loosen. Back in court, the real fight began. Elaine took the stand first. Her voice trembled, but she was clear. She described the bruises, the isolation, the threats, the way Richard controlled the finances and forced her to fake injuries for insurance claims. The jury listened, wide-eyed, horrified. Then we brought in the forensic accountant, medical experts, investigators, all pointing to the same thing, a calculated, repeated pattern of abuse and fraud. But Richard wasn't going down without a fight. His attorney tried to paint Elaine as unstable. "She has a history of depression, doesn't she?" he sneered. I objected instantly. Irrelevant. And, frankly, offensive. But the biggest shock of all came during the cross-examination of a witness I hadn't expected to hear, from my old high school counselor. He had been subpoenaed as part of establishing Richard's long-term pattern of control and abuse, even before his marriage to Elaine. When he took the stand, he brought with him something I had forgotten even existed, a sealed letter I had written at 17, as part of a mandatory reporting effort that never went anywhere, due to lack of evidence. I kept this, the counselor said. She was one of the brightest students I ever had, and one of the most afraid. He handed the letter to the judge, and with permission, I read part of it aloud to the courtroom. He told me I'll never be anything, that I should be grateful he hasn't hit me yet. But sometimes I wish he would. At least, then someone might notice. The room was silent. Richard's face turned white. In that moment, the courtroom was no longer just a space for legal arguments. It was a reckoning. Every lie he had told, every life he had damaged, every threat he had whispered in the dark, it was all laid bare. He was guilty. Everyone could see it. But what no one expected was his confession. On the third day, right before closing arguments, his lawyer requested a private conference with the judge. Richard had decided to take a plea deal, but only if I was the one to read the statement into the record. I agreed. Standing in front of that court, I read his signed confession. Every word was like a weight lifted off my chest. I admit to committing fraud. I admit to manipulating and harming the women in my life. And I understand that I am not the victim, I am the perpetrator. I finished, looked up, and met his eyes one last time. He didn't laugh now. He didn't speak. He just sat there silent, defeated, small. And for the first time in my life, I felt safe. The courtroom was empty now. The lights still buzzed above, and the echo of chairs being tucked in lingered faintly. But the crowd was gone. The verdict had been accepted, the sentence handed down. Richard had been led away in cuffs to serve a 12-year prison term, with no chance of early parole. But I didn't feel triumphant. I stood alone by the witness stand, still gripping the page from his confession. The ink was beginning to smudge in my sweaty hands. 12 years. After everything. After my childhood was shattered, my future nearly erased, my mother emotionally erased. 12 years. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt free. But all I felt was empty. That night I sat on the steps outside the courthouse until it was nearly dark. My badge was heavy on my chest, like a weight I didn't know how to take off. I couldn't cry. I couldn't move. I just kept hearing his voice in my head, "You'll never be anything." And then, something even worse. "I'm proud of you." No, not Richard. My mother had said it. Quietly, hesitantly, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to say it anymore. That was the voice haunting me now. I hadn't spoken to her since the trial began. She'd sat quietly in the back row on the last day, watching her former husband unravel in front of a jury. She didn't cry. She didn't cheer. She just looked old, tired, like she'd aged 20 years since I was last her daughter. I didn't want to face her, but she was waiting for me. As I stood to leave, I saw her figure by the gate, her thin coat drawn tight around her shoulders, her purse clutched like a shield. Her eyes met mine unsure, asking. I didn't walk toward her. I wanted to run. But something inside me, grief, rage, longing, I don't even know, kept my feet rooted to the pavement. We stood there 6 feet apart and said nothing for what felt like forever. Then she whispered, "Can we talk?" I nodded once. Just once. We sat across from each other at a small diner near the courthouse, the same kind of place I used to work in when I was 18. Greasy counters, cheap coffee, cracked booths. How poetic. She stirred her tea. I watched the spoon spin, spin, spin. She didn't speak first, so I did. "Why didn't you leave him?" Her hand froze mid-stir. She lowered the spoon. It clinked too loudly in the cup. "I was scared," she said. "And I was stupid." I waited. I thought, if I just stayed quiet, if I made him happy, he wouldn't turn on you. I thought I could protect you by absorbing it all. I clenched my jaw. You didn't protect me. You stood there while he tore me down every day. You watched him kick me out, and you let him win. Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't stop. I slept in my car. I nearly failed out of school because I was too exhausted to function. I went years without hearing your voice. And you? What? You thought silence was enough. I know, she whispered, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. That made me pause, not because it made things better, but because for the first time, she didn't try to justify it. Just regret. Pure, aching regret. I used to pretend you'd call, I said quietly. I'd stare at my phone between classes, waiting for your name to appear. I thought, maybe once he was gone, you'd remember I was yours. She cried, then really cried. Not the silent kind. Her shoulders shook, and her lips quivered, and she covered her mouth, like she wasn't allowed to feel pain. I remembered you every day, she said, through her sobs. Every single day. But I didn't think you'd ever want me again. And just like that, my wall cracked, not collapsed, not forgiven, but cracked. I reached into my bag and pulled out a faded photo, the only one I had kept from my childhood. Me, maybe 4 years old, smiling with missing teeth, sitting on her lap in the park. I used to look at this whenever I felt like giving up. I said, sliding it across the table. I kept it in my wallet, all through law school. I needed to believe that someone had loved me once. She touched the photo with trembling fingers. I did. I do. My throat tightened. That was the breaking point. All the rage I had carried for so long, rage that had fueled my fight, sharpened my mind, made me the unstoppable woman I had become, suddenly became too heavy to hold. I didn't forgive her that night, but I let her sit with me. I let her touch the past, and that changed everything. Later that week, I returned to my apartment and stood in front of the mirror. The woman staring back at me was strong. She wore scars on the inside, but power on the outside. She had faced the man who tried to break her and won. She had confronted the silence of a mother's abandonment and still stood. But that woman was tired. For 10 years, my identity had been tied to surviving, to fighting, to proving him wrong, to making the world see me. But now that I had done it, who was I? Without the rage, that night I took off the prosecutor's badge and placed it gently in a box. I wasn't quitting. I was choosing. For the first time in my life, I had nothing to run from, no one to fight, no lies to destroy, just me. I walked out onto my balcony, let the night air hit my face, and whispered to no one. You were wrong, Richard. I became everything you said I couldn't be. And now, I'm free. 2 months passed. The courtroom was behind me. Richard was behind bars, and the news cycle had moved on just like I had, at least on the outside. But inside, I was still reckoning with the silence. For the first time in years, I didn't have a goal to chase or a battle to fight. No more depositions, no urgent calls from victims, no nightmares of footsteps down the hall. I woke up, looked around my small but warm apartment, and asked myself, now what am I kept working at the DA's office, but something inside me had shifted. My victories felt hollow. Each win in court reminded me of what it had cost to get here. The fire that once drove me now flickered, still alive but no longer consuming. So I did something strange. I took a week off. No emails. No case files. Just time. I packed a small bag and drove north toward the mountains. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I could think without pressure or pain. There was a cabin lodge, tucked between two lakes, a place I remembered seeing in an old travel magazine at the diner years ago. I had circled the photo back then, thinking someday. Now someday had finally come. The air smelled like pine and wet soil. My phone barely had reception. The silence was beautiful. On my second morning there, I wandered into the small bookstore in town. It was cozy, all wooden shelves and dusty paperbacks. And that's where I met an elderly woman named Miriam who ran the place. She noticed the law book I was browsing and said with a chuckle, "You don't strike me as someone who came all this way just to read about legal precedent." I smiled. Force of habit. She tilted her head. "You're running from something or toward something." I blinked. "I don't know." She gave me a soft look, the kind only someone who's already lived through hell can give. Sometimes when the war is over, the silence is louder than the bombs. Her words hit like a punch to the chest. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She just led me to the back of the store, where there was a quiet reading nook and a kettle already boiling. We talked for hours over tea. Not about the trial, not about Richard, but about what comes next. "Justice isn't the end," she said gently. "It's the clearing. You still have to build something on that ground." That night I lay in bed and let those words echo in my mind. For so long, I had built my identity around pain, around proving people wrong, around showing the world I could rise from nothing. But now that I realized something terrifying. I didn't know who I was when I wasn't fighting. And that had to change. So, I made a decision. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life staring down monsters. I wanted to teach people how to face them before it's too late. When I returned to the city, I submitted my notice at the DA's office. Everyone was shocked. "You're the best prosecutor we have," my supervisor said. "You're just getting started." But I wasn't. That chapter was finished. Instead, I applied for a fellowship to work with a nonprofit that educated high school girls, especially those from underprivileged or abusive backgrounds, on their rights, their voices, their power. And I got it. Now I stand in classrooms instead of courtrooms. I see girls who remind me of the person I used to be. Quiet and angry. Brilliant but scared. I tell them, you don't need someone else's permission to be extraordinary. I see their eyes widen. I know the seed is being planted. Sometimes one of them stays behind after class and asks, "Did someone even tell you that you'd never make it?" And I smile. Yes. But I made it anyway. My mom and I were not perfect, but we talk now. Slowly. Carefully. Like people learning a new language. She came to my first workshop. She cried the whole time, but sat in the front row clutching that old photo of me in the park. After she hugged me and whispered, "I wish I had heard this when I was young." I whispered back, "That's why I'm doing it now. I no longer dream about Richard. He's just a name in a file, A locked door in a prison. A shadow I've outgrown. And when people ask me if I feel healed, I tell them the truth. Healing isn't a finish line. It's a choice you make every day to move forward, even if you're limping. So here I am moving forward. Not as someone's victim. Not as a symbol of survival. But as me. Vanessa Moore. Lawyer. Educator. Survivor. And now, a builder of something better. The morning Richard was transferred to federal prison, I received a letter. It was short. Sloppy handwriting, no return address. You think you won. You didn't. You just got lucky. I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed about him. Not out of fear or anger, just pure dismissal. His words didn't sting anymore. They sounded small, like a man screaming from the bottom of a well, thinking the world still hears him. I didn't write back. Instead, I sent a copy of his confession, signed and sealed, to the community college I once applied to at 18. I asked them to use it as part of their survivor support curriculum. 2 weeks later, I was invited to speak there as a keynote guest. They titled the session, From Silence to Strength, the Power of Telling the Truth. That night after the event, I walked out into the parking lot. The same cracked asphalt where I once cried in the dark, sleeping in my car, and guess who I saw? Mr. Doyle. My high school guidance counselor, the one who ignored the bruises, ignored the warning signs, told me, maybe you should aim lower. Law school's a bit ambitious for your background. He looked stunned when I walked up. Vanessa, I saw your talk. You've really done well for yourself. I met his eyes. Calm, steady, powerful. No thanks to you. He flushed, opened his mouth, closed it. I let the silence sting. Next time a girl tells you she's afraid at home, believe her. Then I walked away. Justice wasn't always a courtroom. Sometimes it was standing tall, where others once tried to make you disappear. Sometimes it was showing up in the very places they said you didn't belong, and owning them. That was my real revenge. And it was glorious. I no longer live in fear. I don't flinch at loud voices. I don't shrink under doubt. I walk into rooms. Now, classrooms, conferences, courtrooms, not asking for permission to belong, but knowing I do. The past doesn't define me anymore. It shaped me, yes, but it didn't break me. I am not the girl who begged to be heard. I am the woman who chose herself when no one else would. And that's the message I leave you with. You are not what they said you were. You are not weak because you were hurt. You are not less because someone failed to love you. You are powerful the moment you stop waiting for someone to save you and start standing up for yourself. Set your boundaries. Hold your worth. Speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. Because freedom doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes in quiet, steady peace, like the morning you realize you don't have to prove anything to anyone ever again. And if this story touched something in you, if you saw a piece of yourself in me, I invite you to share it. Tell your story, or simply leave a comment. You're not alone anymore, and you never were.